Welcome to Geology 108, from trilobites to dinosaurs. A great explosion of biodiversity took place in the Cambrian, marking the beginning of the Phanerozoic, a time that left behind a great collection of fossils that document how life conquered the land and survived major climate and astronomical events. We will describe how the first plants and animals set foot on land and how the first terrestrial ecosystems formed. The evolution of life in the Phanerozoic was deeply influenced by climate and tectonic events. Every extinction followed by radiation of more sophisticated, better adapted species. We will discuss the evolution of animals, from insects to mammals, and the evolution of plants, from green algae to flowers. The end of the Proterozoic represents the culmination of the great oxidation event that brought oxygen to Earth's tertiary atmosphere. The Proterozoic has brought great biological novelties, such as the emergence of the eukaryotic cells. These organisms developed new tricks, such as respiration, which is a more efficient oxygen-based metabolism, sexual reproduction, which enabled more efficient genetic variations, and biological cooperation, which allowed complex and organized multicellular organisms. At the time, tectonic activity was also intense, marked by the breakup of the penultimate supercontinent called Rodinia in the late Proterozoic. Newly created rifts and shallow seas created new environmental niches for life to exploit. Shortly after, about 600 million years ago, the ozone layer started to form and filtered the harmful ultraviolet radiations from the sun, making it possible for life to emerge from the depth of the oceans into millions of new environments in shallow water. The Proterozoic also witnessed dramatic climatic changes with a succession of icehouse and hothouse cycles driven by various positive feedback loops. In the late Proterozoic, Earth was living the Gaskier glaciation, the last major glacial event of the Precambrian. At the time, the Ediacaran fauna, with its collection of soft-bodied animals, was thriving. As has been common in all of Earth's history, climate change was followed by rapid evolution in the biological world. Roughly 530 million years ago, many types of animals learned to build their own protective shells out of hard minerals. Life had already been depositing minerals layers in reef-like stromatolites for billions of years, but somehow, somewhere, an unknown animal evolved to grow its own protective hard parts out of commonplace minerals, most often calcium carbonate and silica. Such an innovation meant a lot in the struggle for survival, because predators would rather eat a soft-bodied morsel than waste energy breaking a tough mineralized exoskeleton. Soon, it was make your own shell or die. The resulting fossil record is amazingly rich, marking a time when sedimentary layers became packed with lifelike remains. A time that has been called the Cambrian explosion or Cambrian radiation. All of Earth's history before this radiation event is referred to as the Precambrian. The Cambrian period, beginning 542 million years ago, was the time of the introduction of skeletons, both internal and external. The real explosion of biodiversity occurred a few million years later, roughly 530 million years ago, when all manner of shelled animals rather suddenly came on the scene. An evolutionary arms race ensued. Armored predators and armored prey assume larger and larger dimensions. Teeth and claws arose, as did bony protective plating and sharp defensive spines. Eyes became mandatory in the cutthroat world of the Paleozoic oceans. The early Cambrian period was a time of almost unbridled growth and diversity in the marine environment. During this relatively short period of Earth history, termed the Cambrian radiation, the pace of evolution increased dramatically. An evolutionary radiation is an increase in diversity of organisms evolving from a common ancestor. However, the explosion of life in the Cambrian was entirely confined to the sea until 500 million years ago in the Ordovician period. Most of the modern groups of organisms emerged at that time, and their basic body plans were established. This was accompanied by a rapid increase in the complexity of many organisms. Compact animals with skeletons evolved to replace the floppy ones of Ediacaran times. Trilobites, mollusks like clams, echinoderms like sea urchins, and sea snails. All of them, except the trilobites, have persisted up to the present, and all equipped with gills, filters, efficient guts, circulatory system, and other complex structures. Although most animal phyla appeared by the Cambrian, the biodiversity at the family, genus, and species levels was low until the Ordovician period. The Phanerozoic eon is the most recent, stretching from 542 million years ago to today, and means visible life because the Phanerozoic rock record is marked by an abundance of fossils. Phanerozoic organisms had hard body parts like claws, scales, and shells, and bones that were more easily preserved as fossils. The Phanerozoic is divided into 3 eras. From oldest to youngest, they are the Paleozoic, meaning ancient life, Mesozoic, meaning middle life, and Cenozoic, meaning recent life. Every era ends with a mass extinction event. The Paleozoic ends with the Great Permian extinction. The Mesozoic ends with the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction of non-avian dinosaurs. The Cenozoic ends with the ongoing 6th extinction, which is caused by runaway human expansion. Life in the early Paleozoic era was dominated by marine organisms, but by the middle of the era, plants and animals evolved to live and reproduce on land. Fish evolved jaws and fins evolved into jointed limbs. The development of lungs allowed animals to emerge from the sea and become the first air-breathing tetrapods, 4-legged animals, such as amphibians. From amphibians evolved reptiles with the amniotic egg. From reptiles evolved an early ancestor to birds and mammals, and their scales became furs and feathers. Near the end of the Paleozoic era, the Carboniferous period had some of the most extensive forests in Earth's history. Their fossilized remains became the coal that powered the Industrial Revolution. The great proliferation of life in the Cambrian period was entirely confined to the sea. The remaining step was for organisms to leave the sea and occupy the land, and eventually the atmosphere. To conquer the land without a surrounding aquatic environment, multicellular organisms had to develop specific biological innovations in order to survive. First, a sort of structural support, such as a skeleton or a strong stem, became needed to contend with gravity, as buoyancy is negligible outside of water. Second, organisms had to develop an internal aquatic environment with a plumbing system that gives it access to all parts of the organism and with devices for conserving the water against losses to the surrounding atmosphere. Third, a new mechanism was required for exchanging gases with air, such as lungs, instead of with water, such as gills. Finally, all sexually reproducing organisms must have developed a moist environment for the reproductive system. Selection for these necessities is largely what has shaped terrestrial organisms into the familiar forms we know today. Green algae, a type of photosynthetic eukaryote, dominated the shallow ocean in the Cambrian. The conquest of the land began when green algae settled in the intertidal zone, where the coastline is intermittently submerged in water due to tides. In the Cambrian period, the day-night cycle was only 23 hours, and the Earth-Moon distance was shorter, creating more powerful tides than today. Algae were naturally washed onto the shores by waves, and those who survived the increased exposure to solar radiations found themselves in an ecological niche. They escaped predation by heterotrophs. Once again, the pillars of evolution, variability, and selection acted to produce genetic innovation. What is the best way to create plants that live on land, starting from marine organisms? Throw generations after generations of mutated photosynthetic eukaryotes into intertidal zones for millions of years and select those best adapted to survive in this environment. In this patient game of optimization, this is trial and error. The Cambrian period was the first of the 6 periods of the Phanerozoic era, which lasted about 330 million years. The Cambrian period was followed in order by the Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Carboniferous, and Permian periods. Early land plants likely evolved from eukaryotes called green algae during the Silurian period from 440 to 420 million years ago, and were of the simplest type. They lacked an extensive root system and were produced without seed, relying on wind to disperse spores, the reproductive machinery. They had no leaves and were restricted to low-lying, wet areas. Modern equivalent are moss and liverworts. Many of these seedless plants could tolerate a drought. For example, mosses survive dry spells by releasing spores that lie dormant until moisture returns. But these ancient plant forms still relied on moisture for the sexual phase of their reproductive cycle. Without moisture, the sex cells have no medium in which to reach each other and fuse. Consequently, the seedless plants have never been able to colonize habitats where moisture is not unfailingly present for at least part of the growing season. So early plants were confined to swamps. The invention of the first tiny energy-trapping leaves took tens of millions of years. The tallest plants with the biggest leaves enjoyed an advantage in the evolutionary struggle for sunlight. Eventually, vascular plants, or higher plants, evolved special tissues for conducting water, minerals, and products of photosynthesis throughout the plant, from roots to leaves. Gas exchange in vascular plants is controlled by adjustable openings in the leaves called stomata, from the Greek for mouth. When carbon dioxide pressure inside the leaf is high, the stomata open. When low, they close. Vascular plants also started to use woody stems for structural support, which allowed them to grow to great heights. Followed the evolution of fan-like ferns, branching limbs, and sturdy woody trunks. By 360 million years ago, in the early Carboniferous, forest had emerged as an utterly new terrestrial ecosystem. For the first time in Earth history, the land was green. The Carboniferous period, which saw that explosive radiation of land plants, fundamentally changed erosion patterns in the environments of coastal regions. For the first time in Earth's history, stream banks were stabilized and rivers were more confined to their path for more of the time. Plant roots led to deeper soils and more clay minerals, which supported rich ecosystems both above and below ground. In the Carboniferous, tropical regions were covered with swamps, filled with giant conifers and populated with arthropods and amphibians. The biggest effect on the near-surface environment involved the intertwined cycles of carbon and oxygen. For the first time in Earth's history, ferns and other land vegetation grew at a rapid rate. However, the microbes that could ingest lignin and cellulose, two complex biopolymers playing a key role in the support tissues of most plants, had yet to evolve. Fungi and the symbiosis of termites with bacteria had not yet appeared to process the dead plant matter either. So enormous loads of wood stayed whole. Trees would simply fall and not decompose. Consequently, biomass was buried in prodigious quantities never before or ever since matched in Earth history. These deposits of dead plant material became thicker and thicker. They accumulated in layers that were sequestered under more and more sand and silt until pressure and temperature transformed vast volumes of former trunks, roots, branches, and leaves into carbon-rich layers of coal. The rate of coal formation in the Carboniferous period was 600 times the background rate. Plants in the Carboniferous swamps are the origin of 99% of current coal deposits. This large-scale removal of organic carbon from the near-surface environment had a remarkable consequence on the Earth system. Composition of Earth's atmosphere reflects a number of interrelated cycles with both positive and negative feedbacks. When vast amounts of carbon are locked away rather quickly in the crust in the form of coal and other dead plants and animal matter, that carbon is no longer bound to oxygen. So the oxygen is effectively liberated. The more carbon is buried, the more oxygen is liberated into the atmosphere. In the Carboniferous period, the oxygen content of the atmosphere soared, more than doubling in less than 100 million years. Extremely high oxygen levels can have one obvious downside. Forest fires triggered by lightning would have burned with much greater ferocity in 35% oxygen, a natural negative feedback for oxygen levels. The earliest plants were seedless and relied on moisture for the sexual phase of the reproductive cycles. Hence, they had a limited range for habitats. In the late Carboniferous period, gymnosperms, or naked seed plants, appeared with male pollen and female cell. The female cell is attached to the vascular system and thus has a supply of moisture. The male cell is carried in a pollen grain that has a hard coating. When the two fuse, a seed results, but it is not protected by a fruit or an ovary. The seed is simply a supply of moisture and nutrients to sustain the early growth of the young plant until it becomes self-supporting by photosynthesis. Naked seed plants survive today, for example, the ginkgo and conifers. Gymnosperms had a huge success. Freed from the swampy habitat, they did not have to compete with the seedless trees of the coal forests, but could occupy the drier uplands of the supercontinent Pangaea, which started to assemble from earlier continental units approximately 335 million years ago. By the end of the Carboniferous period, they had spread over most of the world. Gymnosperms are the last invention in the plant kingdom of the Paleozoic. Gymnosperms dominated the land for 200 million years. For this entire time, no flower was yet to be found on the planet. By the end of the Cambrian, mollusks, brachiopods, nautiloids, gastropods, rhabdolites, echinoderms, and trilobites covered the seafloor. Although most animal phyla appeared by the Cambrian, the diversity of the family, genus, and species levels was low until the Ordovician period. During the Great Ordovician biodiversification event, vertebrates and invertebrates, animals without backbone, became more diverse and complex at family, genus, and species levels. Conquest of the land by animals started in the Silurian, trailing behind that of the plants because the latter represent primary producers, the bottom of the food chain. Heterotrophs cannot expand geographically without autotrophs scouting out first. Among the numerous creatures in the Cambrian seas, many were arthropods, a type of invertebrate with jointed legs, like the trilobites. These animals were the first to make the change from sea to land during the Silurian period. Early arthropods, with a few exceptions, were quite small, had lightweight structures, and were covered with a shell or exoskeleton composed of a hard substance called chitin to provide structural support. They were pre-adapted for life on land in regard to both structural support and water conservation. The earliest to go on land were probably Silurian centipedes and millipedes. By the Carboniferous period, insects with their three-part body, compound eyes, and pair of antennas became abundant. They include dragonflies with a wingspan of up to 60 centimeters. For all their success as land creatures, the arthropods have always had a primitive respiratory and vascular systems. They breathe through tiny tubes that penetrate the outer coating. Because the respirating mass of an aerobic organism increases as the cube of its length, while the area available for gas exchange increases only as the square of the length, this mode of respiration eventually limits the size of an organism. This is one reason that most insects are small. Arthropods have an open vascular system. That is, their blood does not circulate in closed vessels, but is simply body fluids bathing the internal organs. This fluid is generally kept in sluggish motion by a heart that is little more than a contractile tube. This primitive yet close to indestructible system gave the arthropods the resilience to survive until this day and to diversify into more than 1 million terrestrial species. The lineage of humans took a different evolutionary path as our species evolved from fishes, which evolved to conquer the land some 30 million years later. 385 million years ago during the Devonian period. The beginning of the Paleozoic era is marked by the first appearance of hard body parts like shells, spikes, teeth, and scales, and the appearance in the rock record of most animal phyla. That is, most basic animal body parts appeared in the rock record during the Cambrian period. Most notably appearing during the Cambrian is an important ancestor to humans, a segmented fish-like worm called Pikaia. Is the earliest ancestor of the Chordata phylum that includes vertebrates, animals with backbones, to which humans also belong. The chordates possess a notochord, a cartilaginous rod running along the back of the body. Humans and other vertebrates do have a notochord as embryos, later replaced by the backbone. Pikaia and other Cambrian fish were jawless, probably feeding on organic matter dredged from the seafloor. The Devonian period, also called the Age of Fishes, gave rise to plated, jawed, and lobe-finned fishes. The lobe-finned fishes are important for their eventual evolution into tetrapods, four-limbed vertebrate animals that can walk on land. The first lobe-finned land-walking fish, named Tiktaalik, appeared about 385 million years ago and serves as a transition fossil between fish and early tetrapods. Several fossils from the Devonian are more tetrapod-like than fish-like, but these weren't fully terrestrial. The conquest of land by the vertebrates gave rise to the first amphibians that still breed in water. Amphibians evolved in the early Devonian and diversified into many forms by the late Devonian. The first fully terrestrial tetrapod appeared in the early Carboniferous period. The amphibians were able to breathe air and live on land, but still needed water to nurture their soft eggs. Amphibians suffer a similar limitation to seedless plants and rely on water for reproduction and survival. With their permeable skin, they could not survive away from the swamps. The Carboniferous period corresponds to the formation of the last supercontinent called Pangaea. Large, uninterrupted continents offered vast domains away from any coastline. This opened a terrestrial niche for another evolutionary innovation. The blooming plant life of the Carboniferous led to carbon sequestration in the lithosphere. The associated reduction of carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas, in the atmosphere cooled the Earth's surface. By the middle Carboniferous, these cooler temperatures led to the Karoo glaciation and less productive forests. This ice age lasted into the early Permian and inflicted environmental pressure for adaptation. The new continental arrangement and global cooling of the Carboniferous led to a drier climate. The reptiles fare much better than the amphibians, leading to their diversification. Reptiles freed themselves from the water with watertight skin and amniotic eggs around 300 million years ago, which allowed them to rely on non-aquatic environments for reproduction. The first reptiles could live and reproduce entirely on land with hard-shelled eggs that wouldn't dry out. This widened the terrestrial reach of reptiles compared to amphibians. The amniotic egg did for reptilian diversity what jaws did for diversity in fishes and what the naked seeds did for plant diversity. Reptiles originated in the Carboniferous swamps about 375 million years ago and conquered Pangaea. By the Jurassic period, some 185 million years later, the reptiles had moved onto the land, up in the air, and back to the water. This resulted in the production of the two orders of dinosaurs, the largest quadrupeds ever to walk the surface of Earth, and gave rise to two new vertebrate classes, mammals and birds. The end of the Paleozoic era is marked by the largest mass extinction in Earth history. The Paleozoic era had two smaller mass extinctions, but these were not as large as the Permian mass extinction event, also known as the Permian-Triassic extinction event, or the Great Dying. It is estimated that up to 96% of marine species and 70% of land-dwelling terrestrial vertebrates went extinct. Many famous organisms, like sea scorpions and trilobites, were never again in the fossil record. The extinction was caused by extensive volcanism associated with the Siberian traps, which are one of the largest deposits of flood basalts known on Earth, dating to the time of the extinction event. The unusual large volcanic eruption contributed to a large amount of toxic gases, aerosols, and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. In addition, the volcanism may have burned vast coal deposits, releasing methane into the atmosphere. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas that causes the climate to warm. This extensive addition of greenhouse gases from the Siberian traps may have caused a runaway greenhouse effect that rapidly changed the climate, acidified the oceans, disrupted food chains, and caused the largest mass extinction. The Mesozoic eon stretches from 250 to 65 million years ago and is subdivided into the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods. Both the start and end of the Triassic period are marked by major extinction events. The transition between the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods is less well defined, but the end of the Cretaceous is marked by another extinction event coinciding with a giant impact. The first appearance of many modern groups of animals that would later flourish occurred in the Mesozoic. This includes amphibians, reptiles, marine reptiles, mammals, and the archosaurs. The archosaurs, meaning ruling reptiles, occupied all major environments: the land, the dinosaurs, air, the pterosaurs, water, crocodilians, and even fully marine habitats, marine crocodiles. The pterosaurs were the first vertebrate group to take flight. Dinosaurs came on the scene about 230 million years ago as beneficiaries of the end Paleozoic mass extinction. These fascinating reptiles started slow and small, but diversified and radiated into every ecological niche over a span of more than 160 million years. For a time after the Great Dying, dinosaurs competed side by side with large amphibians, but another significant extinction 205 million years ago, coincident with another megavolcano episode called the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province flood basalt, wiped out most non-dinosaur vertebrates. A dinosaur radiation followed in the Jurassic. Mammals got their start from a reptilian ancestor, possibly in the late Paleozoic. Mammals stayed small in mainly nocturnal niches, with insects being their largest prey. The development of warm-blooded circulation and fur may have been a response to this lifestyle. In the Jurassic, species were previously common, flourished due to a warmer and more tropical climate. The dinosaurs were relatively small animals in the Triassic period of the Mesozoic, but became truly massive in the Jurassic. Most of the dinosaurs of the Triassic were bipedal. The major adaptive advantage dinosaurs had was changes in the hip and ankle bones, tucking the legs under the body for improved locomotion, as opposed to the semi-erect gait of crocodiles and the sprawling posture of reptiles. There is a paucity of dinosaur fossils from the early and middle Jurassic, but by the late Jurassic, they were dominating the planet. They diversified into the giant herbivorous, plant-eating, long-necked sauropods weighing up to 100 tons, and bipedal carnivorous theropods. The pterozoids grew and diversified in the Jurassic, and another notable aerial organism developed and thrived in the Jurassic, the birds, for example, the Archaeopteryx. Mammals seem to possess superior adaptation traits, a placenta wand, a large brain, hot blood, but dinosaurs remained the masters of the food chain until the end of the Cretaceous. We come back to the discussion of the plant kingdom with a major evolutionary innovation that took place during the Cretaceous period. During most of the Mesozoic, gymnosperms dominated the land. Life has one drawback for gymnosperms, however. The male cell carrier, the pollen, is spread through the air. What are the chances that a pollen grain loose in the air will find a female cell? To ensure success, gymnosperms have to make huge amounts of pollen. Flowering plants, also called angiosperms or enclosed seed plants, solve the problem of the random distribution of pollen. Through a small incentive in the form of nectar or a share of the pollen, insects were enticed to deliver the pollen. Certain insects, like bees, co-evolved with the flowering plants during this time period to carry out the pollination. The first flowering plants are known from 160 million years ago. Angiosperms also enclose their seeds in a fruit that allows distant transport by animals, in particular insects, birds, and mammals. During the Cretaceous, one of the biggest changes on land was the transition to angiosperm-dominated flora. Angiosperms diversified extensively during the early Cretaceous and became widespread by 120 million years ago. By the end of the period, they had replaced gymnosperms and ferns as the dominant plant in the world's forests. Fast forward to 65 million years ago, and one of the worst days in Earth history. An asteroid estimated to have been about 10 kilometers in diameter collided with Earth near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. An epic mega tsunami swept the globe, followed by massive fires that burned across entire continents. Immense clouds of vaporized rock darkened the skies and shut down photosynthesis. One of the strongest pieces of evidence comes from the element iridium, quite rare on Earth, but more common in meteorites. It has been found all over the world in higher concentrations at a particular layer of rock that formed at the time of the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary. The giant impact occurred while a great series of volcanic eruptions in India, called the Deccan Traps, had already been altering Earth's atmosphere and weakening its ecosystem for hundreds of thousands of years. A significant sea level drop appears to have exposed much of the continental shelf at about that time, upsetting the ocean's food web and killing off all but 8 known ammonite species out of thousands. Whatever the causes, individually or in concert, 90% of plankton species, 75% of plant species, and all of the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct at that time. The last of the ammonite also died out. The Mesozoic era ended with the Cretaceous-Paleogene mass extinction event 65 million years ago. The way for evolving mammals was paved. These small, rodent-like vertebrates had become well established in the Mesozoic, and their survival of the end Mesozoic extinction gave them footing in almost every ecological niche. Within 10 million years of the Indian megalovolcano and coincident asteroid impact, mammals had diversified. Within 15 million years, early ancestors of whales, bats, horses, and elephants had evolved.